Good morning, everyone. If you have your Bibles, please turn with me to Matthew chapter 16. We'll be there in just a few minutes. Matthew chapter 16. So glad that you're here. I know there were some slippery driveways and parking lots this morning you had to endure, and maybe some stayed home this morning because it was just too dangerous for them to be out. But you've made it here, and I'm sure we have a number of people who are online who are with us that way. Also appreciate everybody's interest. And this is already the last Sunday of 2025. It just seems like it just started. And here it is already the last Sunday of 2025, and soon we'll be turning our calendars to 2026. And it just seems, and I'm sure most of you will agree, the older we get, the faster it goes. And right now we're in the middle of winter, and I still feel like I should be doing some things in the summer that I never got to. And it's just going by so fast. And ready or not, here it comes, 2026. There's always some anticipation with the new year and some things that we need to look back on and remember from the previous year and look forward to the new year and prepare for. This Wednesday night, Nick will talk about this a little bit more probably, we're going to gather and look back and kind of do some bookends. Look back on 2026, what we did and what we learned from it, and look back on 2025 and look forward to 2026 and some things that we want to do as a congregation this new year. Preparation for the new year is very important. There was a story told a long time ago about a new Indian chief. He was young and inexperienced, but he wanted to make sure that his people were prepared for the upcoming year, especially the winter that was coming. So he told his tribe, I want you to go out early in the season and start to gather wood and prepare for the new year, or prepare for the winter season that's come, rather. And so they went out and they prepared it, and they cut a wood, and they drug it up, and they stacked it, and they said, is this enough? And the chief said, well, I'll go out across the forest, and I'll look up into the sky, and I'll come back with my answer. And so he went out into the forest, and he looked around, and he called the weather center, and he said, what's the weather going to be like for this winter? And the National Weather Service said, it's going to be a hard winter. And so he went back to his people and he said, it's going to be a hard winter. Continue to gather wood. And so they gathered more wood, and they came to him and they said, is this enough wood? And he said, I'll go out into the woods and I'll go beyond the forest and I'll look up into the sky and I'll come back with my answer. So he went out into the woods and he called the National Weather Service and he said, tell me more about this winter. And they said, it's going to be a very difficult winter and it's going to come early. You better gather more wood. So he went back and he said, we need to gather more wood. And he told them that it's going to be a really hard winter. And so they gathered more wood, and they came to him, and they asked if this was enough. And he said, let me go out and look into the sky. And he went out and he called the National Weather Service again. And he said, are you sure that it's going to be a difficult winter? And they said, it's going to be a difficult winter. And he said, how do you know it's going to be a difficult winter? He said, because we've been observing the natives, and they're gathering wood early this year. We can look up into the sky, and we can determine some weather patterns. In fact, Jesus spoke about that in Matthew chapter 16. Now, you need to know a little bit of the context of this. In Matthew chapter 15, Jesus had done many miracles. He was doing signs and wonders among the people so that they would believe. In fact, in my Bible, it's open on the same page. Look at Matthew chapter 15 and verse 30. This is speaking about Jesus. Then great multitudes came to him, having with him the lame, the blind, the mute, the maimed, and many others. And they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. So the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, and the maimed, and the whole made whole, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. And then in the following verses, leading up to chapter 16, he fed a multitude of people, at least 4,000 people, with just a little bit of bread and a few fish. He was doing these signs among the people, and many, many people witnessed them all together. It wasn't just one person saying, I saw this, and another saying, I saw this. There were multitudes of people witnessing the same things in the same places. And so chapter 16 and verse 1, the Pharisees and the Sadducees came, testing him, and they asked him that he would show them a sign from heaven. This is interesting because he's doing all of these signs. He's doing these miracles. And they come and they say, show us a sign from heaven. Well, in John chapter 6, Jesus had fed a multitude of people in that situation. It may be the same one, maybe a different one. I'd have to re-study that, but there was a multitude of people there, and he fed them with just a few loaves and some fish. And the next day they came to him, and they said, "Show us a sign from heaven." Well, they had just seen a sign. In fact, they said, "Moses gave us manna when we were in the wilderness," talking about their ancestors. "What will you do for us?" And Jesus said to them, "I am the bread that comes from heaven." He is the sign. These people had missed the sign over and over and over. John tells us when in the book of John that these signs, these wonders and miracles were done so that we would believe. That we would believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that by believing we would have life in His name. But many people miss the signs. You ever been driving down the road and missed the sign? It happens to me more than I would like to admit. Miss the exit, miss the sign, don't see it, and I just keep driving. These people were blind. They missed the sign over and over and over. So returning to the text, Jesus answered and said to them, "When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red." Verse 3, "And in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening." Hypocrites! You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. So they would go out and look up into the sky, and by looking at the sky, you can predict what the weather is going to be. We have a saying, "Pink sky at night is a sailor's delight. Pink sky in the morning, sailors take warning." So if you go out at night and it's a pink sky and you want to go fishing the next morning, it's probably going to be a pretty good day. It's going to be calm out on the water. But if you wake up in the morning and the sky is pink, well, you better take warning because the water's going to get rough. And so Jesus is saying, you've learned to do this, but you don't notice the signs of these times. He is the fulfillment of these prophecies. He is the Messiah. He is the Christ. He is the Lord. The Magi, they knew that the Christ was born when they came and they looked up in the sky. And then all these other people saw these wonders and the signs, but they missed it over and over and over. He says you can look at the sky, but you can't look around and see all of these things that are happening and the fulfillment of them, and you don't understand the signs of the times. Now, I want you to know that Jesus isn't condemning them for looking to the sky and noticing what's going on around them by looking at the sky. In fact, that's why we have, one of the reasons that we have the sun and the moon and the stars. A lot of the things that are written in the New Testament, the things that Jesus fulfilled and that He refers to, we can always go back to the first part of the Bible, Genesis 1, 2, and 3. The rest of the Bible is built on that foundation. So if we go back to Genesis chapter 1, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament," or in the expanse of the heavens, the outer space. "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years. And let them be for the lights of the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. You see, wherever you live, whatever language you speak, and however you fill your day, that day will be the same as everyone else's in at least one significant way. The sun will rise in the morning, and it will set in the evening. Now, you may not see it. It may be under the clouds and so on, but the sun continues to rise and to set over earth. The sun is very, very predictable. And it follows regular anticipated cycles. We can set our watches by the sun. And beginning in the ancient times, in a sense, the sun gave birth to a child, meaning the calendar. Calendars resulted from the observations of the sky. And so this is what we read in Genesis chapter 1. Whether your calendar hangs on the wall or it appears on the phone, those days, seasons, and years are made known by the placement of the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky. Very few things in this world can be depended upon, but the sun is loyal. The sun is steady and true, Its cycle is trustworthy year after year. At the same time of each month, the shape of the moon will change. It will wax and it will wane. The process takes about 30 of these sunsets and sunrises. The stars, too, they will move across the sky, returning to their original position after about 365 of those sunrises and sunsets. From our earliest days, humans have looked to the sky and observed the night patterns, and from them, they've tried to predict and to measure the movements, and for good reason. By counting the days and the passages of the moon, you could predict changes in the weather. These ancient people could tell when winter was approaching. And long before there was electronic calendars or calendars that hung on the wall, they could tell when the days were going to grow shorter or longer and the weather would get warmer or cooler. They would know when to plant crops. They would know when to prepare for their hunts and when particular animals that migrate in particular seasons were expected to come by, when their animals were likely to give birth, and so on. The world's history is time-stamped by these signs, these seasons, these days and years, and these seasons, days, and years are compiled into calendars. Most of our daily lives are dictated by a calendar. It tells us what seasons to gather and to prepare for the winter, and when to plant our fields. On these calendars, we mark what days the kids will return to school, what days we work, and which days we stay home, what days we celebrate birthdays and anniversaries and holidays and New Year's. Some of us would like to just throw that calendar in the lake. We see it as controlling, restraining, and obnoxiously crowded. Others would simply not know how to operate without a calendar. They see calendars as an essential part of organization that keeps life functional. Even those of us who dread the grind of a schedule have to acknowledge the value of it. It does keep us functional. Through God's wisdom and God's wonder, life is made operational by these timestamps that have their foundation in the observation of the sun and the moon and the stars. In the Bible, there's a lot of timestamps as well. One of the greatest ones came in Exodus chapter 12. You might remember that story. The Hebrews began their calendar on this specific month, the month that they exited Egypt. On that month, the Lord told them in Exodus chapter 1, this will be the first month of your year. It was the month that they were saved from slavery. And on the 10th day of that month, they were to acquire a lamb. And on the 14th day of that month, they were to kill that lamb at twilight. And these markers on the calendars were for their Passover that would commemorate the passing over of the firstborn before they left Egypt. So the Hebrew word for month there simply means new moon. It was a time marked by the lunar cycle. And this would be their first month. Later in Matthew chapter 2, at Jesus' birth, the Magi, or the wise men, they came from the east and they studied the sky. They knew when the Christ was born by that star that was in the sky. While the Passover commemorated the saving of the firstborn prior to their freedom from Egypt, Christ was the one that was born of God, sacrificed to save the world from their sins. The rising and the setting of the sun was used to count the days that Jesus was in the tomb. After 3 of them, he arose. That too took place after the Passover, the first day of the Hebrew month, which would have been the first month of the Jewish calendar. Exodus doesn't name that particular month in Exodus chapter 12. However, in Deuteronomy, it's called the month of Abib, which means simply the green ear, which was appropriate because it was the time of the year that the green ears of barley would begin to develop. It would be March or April in our Gregorian calendar. Nehemiah and Esther talk about the same month, but they call it the month of Nisan, which is appropriately named for the flight. That was when they took their flight out of Egypt into the wilderness. But this new name, Nisan, appears during and after the Babylonian exile. It's a borrowed word from the East, which originally was associated with the month of flowers in the Babylonian days, which makes sense because that would be about March or April in the Gregorian calendar. I find it very interesting that throughout time, calendars have overwhelmingly used the same references for the sun and the moon and the stars to assess their days and their months and their years. Even if the name of the month is translated differently or stamped differently with a completely different name, they still use these same processes for time. Also, often the ancient civilizations named their months after a pantheon of idols and pagan gods. It was the case with the Roman calendar. The Roman calendar is the foundation for the calendar that we use today, which is called the Gregorian calendar. It was Julius Caesar's astronomers who explained that they needed 12 months to make up the year and an additional leap year to synchronize the seasons. January, February, March, May, and June are all named after Roman or Greek gods, mythological gods. For example, January was named after Janus, the Roman god of new beginnings. This god was a god with one head, but had two faces. And in honor of this mythological god, one face would look forward to the future and one would look back at the previous year. And so this became the first month of this year of the Roman calendar. We call it January, named after Janus. The Romans put a lot of thought and deliberation into intentionality into naming some of their months. Most of the rest of the months were named after the number of the month that it represented. However, there were 2 months that are named after Roman emperors. After all, the Roman emperors were often heralded as gods themselves. Several Roman emperors tried to have a month named after them, including the cruel and malicious Nero. Can you imagine a month named after Nero? I don't know what we'd call it, Neronius or something. It would be a terrible way to name a month. There were only 2 Caesars that were remembered by the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar. One is Julius Caesar. That's where July comes from. It was the birth of Julius Caesar, from whom the month was named after. And then also August is the only other month named after this historical figure, Augustus Caesar, who was the nephew of Julius Caesar. When Christ was born, Augustus Caesar had become the mark of time. Our Nigerian missionary, Dr. Moses, he doesn't know his exact birth date. Not even for sure what year it was, but he knows pretty close. Dr. Moses has no birth record and therefore no birth date that he's aware of, what specifically it is, because out in the bush country of Nigeria, there were no calendars. And so he only knows about how old he is because his people told him that when he was born, such and such person was in power and such war was going on, and they knew about what year that was. Similarly, Caesar's reign became a timestamp for events. In Luke chapter 2, for example, we read that it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This is how powerful these emperors were. This is how renowned they were, that they would mark the days by who was in power. And this came out in the days of Caesar Augustus. It wasn't only Julius Caesar or Augustus Caesar that marked times. In Luke chapter 3 and verse 1, we have now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor over Judea, Herod the Tetrarch of Galilee, and so on and so forth there. The world rotated around these emperors. They marked their times, their schedules, and the calendars around these emperors. It was Caesar's image that was on the coin. It was Caesar to whom they paid tribute. Generally, though, the Jews and the Jewish councils resented the Caesars. They didn't want to pay taxes to Caesar, who was not even part of their Jewish community. But the Sanhedrin and the chief priests, they resented another king even more than Caesar. And that is Jesus. Jesus, who reigned over the house of Jacob forever and who had been given the throne of his father David. When the council stirred up the Jews enough, they cried out for Jesus to be crucified. But Pilate found no reason for him to be put to death. And when this happened, they cried out to Pilate, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." They hated Jesus this much that they would tell Pilate, "You're not a friend of Caesar if you don't put him to death." And Pilate responded, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." It was an amazing thing how that this became completely flipped. They resented Caesar and all the Roman power until Jesus became known. And they resented him even more. And suddenly they were friends of Caesar. After all, the Julian calendar ruled their lives. Over 1,500 years later, when the Gregorian calendar was adopted, this on the screen is an image of the Julian calendar, the ones that the Romans would use. But 1,500 years later, when the Gregorian calendar was adopted by the papacy of Gregory XIII in 1582, it had made small adjustments from the Roman calendar because they realized that following this Julian calendar, they had gotten off track. It no longer lined up with the spring equinox. And this was a problem for many reasons, not the least of which the celebration of Easter was determined by the date of the spring equinox. So in other words, the world needed to be aligned rightly by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You see, he is the Son of God who lives, not Janus, not any other Greek or Roman god. He is the king who reigns, not Julius Caesar, not Caesar Augustus, not Tiberius Caesar, nor any other. He is the image of the true God, and it's his image that is stamped on our hearts. So we refer to today as December 28th, 2025 AD. We know BC stands for before Christ, and it refers to the years preceding the birth of Christ. AD, though, does not mean after death. AD is Latin for the year of the Lord, and it refers to the years that have transpired since the birth of Christ. So Christ died in AD 33 approximately. There are a few countries that do not use this Gregorian calendar. Most do. And some people or some countries use their own calendars for religious markers alongside this Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar is still used in multiple nations around the world. Most nations around the world use this calendar. The Gregorian calendar is the international standard around the world. And Jesus Christ is the timestamp on it. This is the year of the Lord. And whenever we say AD, this is a confession of the existence of our eternal King, Jesus Christ. The American Constitution recognizes all civilians need to align their daily, seasonally, and yearly routines with Christ our Lord. Just prior to listing the 39 signatures on the U.S. Constitution, the men placed their signatures on this paramount document as an indication of their approval of its contents. And by the Constitution's own closing remarks, we read this: "Done in convention by the unanimous consent of the states present on the 17th day of September in the year of our Lord, 1787, in witness whereof we have whereunto subscribed our names," and then we have all of the names of those patriots. There was an article that came out several years ago by Dave Miller. It was an article titled AD and BC is no longer PC. It's no longer politically correct. And in that article he wrote, "Seemingly never satisfied with the successive gains made in their relentless assault on the Christian religion, the social engineers of political correctness are even unhappy with our calendar. There appears to be no end to the capricious desire to sanitize our society by expunging every indication of America's Christian heritage. Western civilization's reckoning of time is based on the Gregorian calendar that reflects a Christian worldview by dating the whole human history in terms of the birth of Christ." More recently, BC and AD have become offensive to many people. They do not want to recognize it's the year of the Lord. They would like to eliminate Christ from their worldview. And so for years, academics have solved this problem by embracing other designations, CE and BCE, CE for Common Era, and BCE before the Common Era. The Common Era is the year of the Lord. And before the Common Era would be BC, before Christ. But they just renamed it this way. These, of course, are attempts to restructure our values, to take our minds away from the central figure in history and to ease him and to erase him from the center of our lives and our communities. But that can't happen to those of us who know. Who know what, you may ask? Who know this next verse. If your Bibles are still open to Matthew chapter 16, take a look at verse 4. Jesus continues, "A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed." They were hypocrites. They wouldn't notice the sign anyway. But he did say there is one more sign. There is another sign that's coming. So not only are there signs in the times of the seasons, days, and the years that we look up into the sky, but there is one more sign that Jesus said would come to them. In fact, it came in their generation. He said that it is the sign of Jonah. And what is the sign of Jonah? Well, Jesus explained. Now, for me, it's just a couple pages back in Matthew chapter 12. I want to share Matthew chapter 12 with you, and we will close in this section here. A similar situation took place. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 38, some of the scribes and the Pharisees answered and said, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." This is very familiar, right? They want to see a sign. And in verse 39, he answered and said to them, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks a sign, and no sign will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah." Verse 40, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." That is the sign. The resurrection of his dead body is a sign that we need to remember. Of all of the other signs that they forgot, that they didn't see, he said there's one more sign that's coming. It's the resurrection. It'll come after 3 days of me being in the tomb. It's the resurrection that says he is the Son of God who lives. Not Janus, not any other Greek or Roman god. He is the king that reigns forever. It's not Julius Caesar, not Caesar Augustus or Tiberius Caesar, nor any other. And it's his image that is the image of the true and the living God who is on our hearts and therefore on our calendar. He is the one our days revolve around, and he is the one we mark the worth of our days by. You see, wherever you live, whatever language you speak, and however you fill your day, that day will be the same as everyone else's in at least one significant way. The sun will rise in the morning and it will set in the evening, just as sure as the sun rose and lives forever. There are very few things in this world that can be depended upon, but the sun is loyal and steady and true. And how do we know this? We have the sign of Jonah. And soon, the calendar will turn again to 2026 AD. And that too will be the year of the Lord. My hope is that this day, the Lord's Day, will be recognized in each heart around the world, and that every day after it will be. If we can assist you in a spiritual way, whether it's prayers or baptism, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.